We are ready to go then, sir. We are going live in now.
All right.
2 seconds then. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to SCube TV. We have a special guest from a special place, Senator John B. Coghill from Alaska State Senate. And welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Senator John, how are you today?
I am very well. In fact, yesterday was election day, and though I've been in 22 years, this is the first time I'm behind the count a little bit. So we'll see. It's a very close race, and we've got somewhere around 4,000 votes to count yet. So mostly absentees or special write-in.
Gotcha.
It's a tight race.
It's a tight race. Okay, I mean that's very interesting to know. We'll be curious to know the result at the end of the maybe in a few hours or the end of the day, probably.
The way it's looking, we won't know until the end of August.
Oh, okay.
Because it's mostly the absentee ballots that will make the difference on this one. It's almost right at we're almost right at 50-50 right now.
Right now, very close and tight race. And you've been in the in the politics for a long time, in the social service for a long time. And
this is my 22nd year, yeah.
22nd year. Okay. So why don't you help us out in understanding a little bit about yourself and also the state of Alaska a little bit? So I mean, the state of Alaska has a special place in U.S. and also on the earth, I would say. Because of its geographical and its landscape and all those things. I would really appreciate if you can tell us more about yourself and the Alaska.
I love to talk about Alaska. In fact, I was in the Air Force way back in 1969 to 74, and I spent 4 of those years in England. And often I would say I'm from Alaska, and that would start a whole new conversation. So. Yeah, I was born here. I was born in a small village just south of the Fairbanks area. There was about 300 people in the village, and it was kind of evenly split between Alaska natives and some of us non-natives. My grandparents immigrated from Scotland and Denmark and came over here at the turn of the century, the 19th century or the 20th century. So my dad was born here. I was born here. And we were merchants in a small town. We had a grocery store, and I remember trading with trappers. We would trade furs for groceries, and they would take the groceries, and then 6 months later they'd come back with the furs, and it was called grub staking them. And so I remember as a kid grading a lot of furs, whether it was wolf or beaver pelts. So I grew up in that kind of a realm. Most of the transportation when I was a kid was on the river. Most of the villages that we dealt with were up and down in the river, or we flew in airplanes in the 50s and 60s. And so I grew up in this wonderful, wonderful state. The Yukon River is the biggest river in Alaska. The Tanana River connects with that Yukon River. And so our town started because the railroad was built in the early 1900s, and it met that river, and it became a transportation corridor. So my hometown really was a transportation corridor, 400 miles from the ocean, and it connected with the biggest river in Alaska that went right through the middle of Alaska, and it became kind of a hub for transportation. So in growing up, I got to know all the people on the river, the villages, all of them small, most of them Athabascan Indian villages. During that time of growing up, we became a state. So I was born in the territory of Alaska, 1950, and we became a state in 1959. So I was just a kid, but it was kind of interesting. My dad ran for the territorial legislature. He was in the territorial legislature. He was on the Constitutional Convention that put the Constitution of the state of Alaska together. And so I got to watch the political discussion of trying to build this great wilderness and state. mostly from that involvement as a kid. Of course, Dad had a business. We were merchants. We had a grocery store, and then finally fuel oil. So I got to know people all over in the mining industry, in the timber industry, because of our fuel, and then up and down the river. So I had this rich life of getting to know the industry from the new people coming into Alaska, and the villages that had been there for years and years and years, decades, hundreds of years. So I had this. I thought I was at the end of the world. I thought people came here just before they fell off. But what I found out as I grew up is this is a special place. So I've enjoyed living here. Now as a legislator, I feel like I'm part of the building of it, and what I would call the host committee to the whole world, right? We get to host it for the rest of the world. But my dad really was the politician. He was in the state senate. He was a lieutenant governor. And so when he retired, I just happened to be a school teacher at the time. I was teaching in a private school. I was a pastor's assistant. And I was tasked to go look for somebody to run for office. And my last name, Coghill, was very well known because he had been a member of our Constitutional Convention. He was the head of the Republican Party in Alaska. He was a longtime senator and finally lieutenant governor while he ran businesses. So guess I got to run businesses while he was off doing the political thing. So I learned the value of working with people, businesses. But I became a Christian in my mid-20s and began studying, and that study led me to do some counseling. And I had a pastor ask me if I would join the staff to work with him, not only because I knew business, I knew my way around the political arena, but I also had good personal relations with people. So after 15 years of doing that, I got tasked to run for office. I was 48 years old. I am now 70. So I've had a good long time of serving the people of Alaska. The nice thing about Alaska is we have this great geography. It is in the Arctic. It's in the Pacific. It bumps up right up next to Russia. It borders Canada. We're disconnected from the continental United States, and it's a beautiful, beautiful land. I have moose in my backyard sometimes. And in fact, just the other day, I had one of my dogs chase the moose right out of my lawn. So, it's that kind of great place. Right now, it's dark out. You can see the door behind me. It's dark out. But just a month ago, you could have had the sun shining at this time of day. So we're in the Arctic, so the sun can be 24 hours a day in the summer. And now we're in that part where we're getting dark at night now. So it's a beautiful, beautiful state. The state itself is not the biggest landowner in Alaska, though. The federal government, when it bought Alaska from Russia, kept most of the land, and it's mostly in forest land, wilderness land, and some kind of parkland designation. So Alaska owns about a third of it, and that we make our money off of our oil and gas, our mining and mineral, our timber, and the things that we can do in the ocean. We are one of the biggest fisheries in the world, natural fisheries. Salmon is definitely our hallmark. And so it's big geography, and we have more coastline than the whole United States. I think 5 times the coastline of the United States. So it's a lot of coast, and it's Arctic. It's the Bering Sea, which kisses right up against Russia. And if you think about it, Russia now has been doing a lot of oil and gas development on theirs, and they come right past Alaska. And one of the things that we're concerned about is how that impacts our wildlife along the coastline. So we watch out. We're kind of a steward for the ocean, even though it's international waters or mainly federal. Those of us in Alaska feel very strongly that we get to be good stewards for that. So we watch very closely. We have, like I say, some of the best salmon fisheries. And then we have this rainforest called the Tongass National Forest. It's about a 10 million acre forest, but only about less than 1% of it is harvested because it's been preserved by the federal government. Now, guys like me think we should harvest some and do second growth. Not much harvesting going on. Some of it is owned by the native groups, and they harvest off of it some, and that keeps some of the villages with a good livelihood. But it's not what I would say a big commercial forestry, even though it's one of the biggest rainforests in the world. So a lot of geography and few people. We're only about 750,000 people up here. And most of the people live in the Anchorage area. The Anchorage area grew primarily because it was right on the ocean, good shipping, but oil and gas was discovered in that place in the 50s and 60s, and it became kind of an economic hub. So you'll hear Anchorage, the Kenai Peninsula where the oil and gas is, and the Matanuska-Susitna area where in the, I think it was in the 40s and 50s, the federal government made land available for people to come up and farm, and it's become kind of one of the breadbasket farms areas of Alaska. Even though we have a shorter growing season, it grows some excellent food. So we have quite a diversity. The southeast of Alaska, where the capital is, I have to drive through Canada to get to the capital. It's about a 600-mile drive for me, but I have to go into Canada, along British Columbia, and down into the what they call the Southeast Panhandle. So you either fly there.
In Michigan too, like if I need to go to the New York side or especially Boston, I need to cut through Canada to save 2 hours of drive.
Yeah. So, and in order for me to go to my capital where I get to serve, I fly to Anchorage. It takes about 45 minutes. And then I fly to Juneau, which is about an hour and 15, hour and a half flight, depending on the weather. So it's a big geography. The Arctic is a very sensitive area, but it's been very productive for us. The oil and gas that has come out of that field has been significant for Alaska. And when we came into the Union of the United States as a state, we agreed that we would allow the federal government actually required that the subsurface rights to all the minerals in the land would belong to the state. And if we didn't use them, then they would revert back to the federal government. So in order for us to have a small population manage schools and roads and public safety, the royalties off the minerals and the oil and gas were meant to run Alaska. And so in the 50s, we discovered oil. It's been good. And in the 60s, we hit a big field called Prudhoe Bay. It's kept us in money for a long time. The pipeline goes right through my backyard over here. It's probably just not even 3/4 of a mile from me. And every day, right now, about 500,000 barrels of crude oil go right past my house every single day. And it brings somewhere about $2.5 billion to Alaska in money. And what we did, though, is kind of interesting. We took 25% of the royalty and the leases of that oil, and we put it in a savings account. And it's called a permanent fund. And that's been building for a lot of years. Right now, it's at about a $63 billion fund. And from that fund, we have been paying a little bit of that to every Alaskan as part of what you call a dividend check. And instead of us having a tax, we've actually been able to return money to the citizens. The oil flow is going down, and certainly the oil price has gone down lately. So that formula that we've been giving out is probably going to have to change. But I think for a while, we'll be able to share a little bit of the value of that resource with all Alaskans and still be able to fund our government, our education system, and build our roads. We have good years and bad years on that, but it's been an excellent system. Now, it gives us a lot to argue over, and we do argue over it, believe me. In fact, I'm up for election this time, mainly because I'm willing to change that formula of giving money away, and people aren't real happy about that. So,
I've been reading about multiple things about the permanent funding and the permanent fund and education and a few other things, the roads in your state. Suddenly we come back to all these points. You have given a very good, introduction for the yourself and also the state of Alaska, which is beautiful and kind of a promo kind of a thing for tourism of Alaska, I would say. That kind of introduction you've given us, which is very nice. Thank you. I would like to start with one question. Right now, all over the world, we are going through COVID-19 pandemic. So we would like to know a little bit about, how is it in Alaska, and how are you, how the state is handling the COVID-19 in Alaska?
So, yes, it has hit us, and it hit us hard. So there's a couple of ways we can talk about it. The first way is, how has it affected us health-wise? I wrote down some numbers here. We've had about 4,500 cases in Alaska of 750,000 people. So about 1,300 of them have recovered, and we got 41 people in hospital right now. So and we've had about 29 people die. So health-wise, it has affected us. And because people have to come to Alaska by flying, what we've done is we've put restrictions on people coming into Alaska. They have to take a COVID test before they come in if they are not residents. If they're residents, they have to take a test when they get here and stay home for the 2 weeks. That has been pretty good. There is no face mask mandate in Alaska as a rule, but several communities have changed who can come into the community or what they're required in face masks. Now, the most populous area in Alaska is Anchorage, and they have had a face mask mandate. And they've probably had the most impact, mainly because Anchorage is an international city. We have fishing people who come from Russia, from the Philippines, from Korea. It's an international market. In fact, in Alaska, our international marketing, primarily, probably in order, is China is one of our biggest trading partners. Korea is one of our biggest trading partners. Japan, and then Canada, and I think in that order. And our tourism is international. Now, it has affected us economically because during the summertime, our fishing industry goes up, and sure enough, people came in and brought COVID. And so what we call the non-residents, about 800 people have, of the probably 12,000 people, about 800 have brought COVID and are under some healthcare mandates. But our tourism just went flat. And I'm sure that's true in many, many places of the world. But it literally dried up my my industry, which a lot of people gear up for during the wintertime. And they were just gearing up when the COVID situation hit. And so our tourism industry and all the support industry that goes with it has just taken a beating. And so most of us who live here are doing our dead level best to try to help those industries, but some of them are just going to have to shut their doors. It's very, very sad. Some of them are mom and pops. Some of them are big, like the cruise ship industry. And so all the docks and harbors are very, very slow. And so it's very important that whatever we do in Alaska, helping those communities is going to be important. So the federal government has given some economic, under the CARES Act, they gave some money, and it has helped people from going under through June. But August is now telling a different story. And it's you can see there are some people that are making tough decisions right now in August. So it has been tough. But I think health-wise, we're doing good. The government has not been, you hear the debate. Some governments go overboard and limit your freedom. And we've tried to keep our economy as open as possible, thanks to our governor. And yet some communities have just had to make sure they're highly restrictive. And unfortunately, it's one of the biggest cities in Alaska. About of our 700,000 people, there are about 300,000. So you can see that's a big deal in Alaska.
There is another topic I want to bring it up. I mean, most of the villages are migrating to the towns. That's another challenge. I mean, which has many states, as also many countries facing the same topic. But I'll come back to that one in a minute.
Right.
Coming back to the tourism, I know you mentioned it. I mean, health-wise, I know. I mean, geographically, Alaska in a different situation where people have, if they need to go, they need to fly, so you were able to control. I mean, to at least put some checkpoints. I mean, where you can minimize the people coming with the COVID. I mean, from outside. I mean, that's one advantage you have, and also the population is also spread out. They're not. I mean, except the Anchorage. I mean, the rest of the places, just like Canada. I mean, the people are spread out. So spreading the disease is also not that as wild as the we see in the new state of New York or New York City or California. Where people are they live closely, which is one way blessing, I would say, in this situation. But the other impact is, I mean, Alaska. I know as we discussed offline earlier. I mean, the summer is a peak period for the business. I mean, the tourism industry. People will like to come to Alaska during the summer. I'm sure, just like Florida, Alaska would have got hit. I mean, hard on with the tourism business. And also the small businesses too. So what is that? I mean, you are a government or a senator or as a businessman yourself, see the future of these small businesses in maybe next year, or what will be the future of? Because the tourism may not come back the way it used to be immediately. It will take some time. It takes some time for people to feel comfortable to travel and do the tourism, those kind of things. So what is that you foresee the future of these small businesses, and especially the tourism in Alaska?
It's going to change. So a lot of our tourism has been in volume, and that is like the Princess tours, the Norwegian tours. That's probably going to change up a little bit. So probably my guess is people will start doing more niche marketing. And so some of the smaller businesses, just out of necessity, are going to have to switch up their business model. In the interior, we were already doing that. In Anchorage and on the coastline, as you said, if you come into Alaska, usually people come in Southeast Alaska on a cruise ship. That's the most common way, and that's just probably not going to be as big a business as we had planned on. Now it'll probably come back to some degree, but people are going to be very, very cautious. So up here, we'll probably, if you want to see the Northern Lights, we'll probably try to attract people up there for the winter time. If you want to go skiing, there are great places. Mostly wilderness, riverboat issues. We can supply those kinds of things. And then so working with the airlines who are also feeling the pressure of the COVID economic crash, really. So the answer is, I don't know. We'll wait and see. I've watched hoteliers asking that question. Okay, how do I manage my hotel? I'm looking into a winter. My costs go way up in the winter, and my volume goes way down. Normally, I make that up during the summer. It's not going to happen this year. So, will they survive? I think many of us Alaskans are trying to invite small groups up to help. And in some ways, I think it's going to improve us, because in many ways, when you look at a volume industry, they have small avenues that they travel in. If you get smaller people, they can broaden out into Alaska, and they can take excursions that you wouldn't be able to in a volume way. So I think we're going to have to really put our best effort forward on diversifying how we host to Alaska, because in some ways we host it to the whole world, because people come from Germany, from India, from New Zealand, all over the world come to Alaska. And now many of them are going to want to get a little more personal experiences rather than those more crowded experiences. Those may bounce back, but I think we're going to do our best, especially up here in the interior. Fairbanks is only about 100,000 people here. And we have North Pole, which is a Santa Claus town. And a lot of people drive up from Canada to come to the North Pole area, which is nice. And so we can connect with Canada. But our best bet is to bring people in by airplane from all over the world. We have an international airport here in Fairbanks and one in Anchorage. And we're just going to have to figure out better ways to use those to host Alaska. In some ways, it's going to help us, because I was raised here when we were more in the survival mode than in the hosting mode, because we didn't have the oil money. Even if people came to Alaska, they only came to the ports. We've been getting people into the wilderness areas more and more. And those are smaller groups, and they take a little more attention, and they need guiding. And so I think we can do more and more of that. But yeah, we're in the process of thinking that through.
You got very nice. I mean, you're talking about customizing the tour packages. I mean, rather than going remas, this thing. I mean,
yeah.
We have been hearing that one. I mean, since April or May. I mean, affluent people. I mean, renting the whole motels, those kind of things. I mean, in the northeastern states of U.S. That's what we've been hearing about. They've been hiring most of the motel, like 20 room motel or 40 room motel. They are taking out the whole wing and then enjoying it for their own family. I mean, to avoid. That's a different extreme side, but I mean, at least you, as you said rightly, you can customize the packages and then try to show them more of Alaska.
I'm hoping we can. I will say, going into this winter, a lot of the people who generally will survive the winter because of the summer are going to have to rethink that plan. Some will end up going away. And that, to me, is a very sad, because many of them are families who invested heavily and are not going to get the return. And that's going to cause some real economic stress.
Right, I agree. I mean, I see that one. I mean, mostly there, at least in the mainland. I mean, within Michigan where I live, I mean, we see the restaurants struggling, retail stores struggling. I mean, it will be it's challenging for them, for some of them, not everybody, but at least some of them to come back. And I'm sure in another few months.
And I've had a business. I've been in business on a couple of times, and I had one fail on me, so I know what it's like. It took me several years after the failure to pay it all off, and that's going to happen. And that creates family stress, community stress, and it changes how money flows in the community. And so we're in for a tough year, I think, personally.
I hope, I mean, it will be less painful, and hopefully people will figure out a way to survive. let us hope and pray for that. And I will leave the topic there and we'll come back. I mean,
All right.
go to another thing. During the same pandemic time, we got another social issue, which was it started in Minneapolis. I mean, Black Lives Matter. So I know in the mainland area, we've seen many protests. And how is it in Alaska? Is there any movement, and what is that about, and what is your views? What are your views on that?
It's not gone unnoticed in Alaska. We've had several groups in Alaska, mostly Anchorage, demonstrate. But I would say we probably don't have near the fallout that you would have, say, in Seattle or Chicago. We haven't had any violence. We have had some pretty intense discussions. There's no doubt about it. In Alaska, the race issue is probably less of an issue. We're a very diverse people up here. Asian, Alaska Native, Eskimo, us white guys, a lot of Filipinos, a lot of Korean people. So I think in Alaska, we're probably more willing to live with our differences and enjoy each other. And so the politics of it, though, have probably been what has surfaced, and that is the politics of socialism versus democracy. And that has surfaced up here, and we see some people demonstrating. And to be fair, there are some places where we can do some improvement. I was in a little gathering last Saturday where some of us were there to support the police, and some people there were saying, no, the police need to be changing a little bit. And it was a very cordial demonstration, but we were lined up on one side of the street and they were lined up on the other side of the street, and they had signs. Some of them were inappropriate for Alaska. And so I think it became obvious that they were inappropriate. But some actually had some legitimate beefs with our police, and we're not perfect, right? And but I think it's unwise to hold them in contempt. But you can always expect best, and I think that's kind of how we ended up in the interior here. Now in Anchorage, it got a little more political and a little hotter, but no, there was no burning, no. I would say really bad behavior. There was some tension. That's about it. So I think in Alaska, it has fallen out to the political discussion more than demonstrations that are angry or destructive.
Gotcha. I mean, that's good way. I mean, we got an idea of what's happening in the Alaska. Along this MLB or BLM or Black Lives Matter movement and police reforms. I know the police department has got a lot of hit. I mean, nowadays, I mean, with this movement, I mean, there are many good officers, I mean, who help the society and help the people and help the, community people. But there are a few issues. I mean, as you said rightly, nobody is perfect. I mean, there are issues which need to be looked at and then change it. And once we change, hopefully things will change for good. I mean, in good sense. Yeah.
And our police have been very responsive, and I got to give them high marks. They have actually gone out of their way to make sure that people are safe, but they're treated respectfully. And I'd say their methodology is second to none.
Gotcha. Good to hear that. Senator, I want to ask you one thing. I mean, as you said in your initial brief, I mean, you mentioned that, I mean, most of the land in Alaska is owned by federal government and only 1/3 is by the Alaska state. And I read something about the roadless, very less, I mean, connectivity within the Alaska. That is also the one way it is helping keep the natural state of the land, and another side is it is hindering the growth. So how do you strike the balance between these two? And what is your view on this particular? I think it's 2001 or 2000. I don't know exactly. That's when the bill was passed not to build more roads in some of the forest. Two forests. I mean, they have identified, and which you have mentioned. One is the Tongos, and another one is I forgot the name of.
There are actually two issues there. One of them is the roadless rule primarily deals with the Tongass National Forest. And the Tongass National Forest has separate rules from anything else in Alaska because it became a national forest under certain rules that Congress passed a special law for. In that law, they guaranteed us access for mining, timber, and community access. So we were given the right to those roads. And then through their management system, they began closing the roads down. And so they've literally closed off communities and they've shut whole industries down. So in Alaska, we have fought for keeping the roadless rule with some exception to it. And we've just not been able to manage that for Alaska's benefit. But so the federal management of that forest basically has veered towards what they call the roadless rule. With very rare exception, the place, you can't build a new road in there, that's for sure. And some of the old roads may not be able to be used. It's tough on communities and it throttles back an economy, but it does preserve the forest. And that is why people fight very strongly for that, because it is one of the pristine rainforests in the world. And the federal government manages it. And since the federal government manages it, when we became a state, they gave us certain promises for access to it. And those promises have been squeezed down to nearly unrecognizable statements. So we fight hard for access to the land, but it's their management, it's their land, and we're landlocked with any state land there. Now, the state does have some land there. The other thing, though, is in the rest of Alaska, building a road, to use a term, everything we do is greenfield. There's never been a road there before, outside of a trail that they might run a dog sled to get mail to a community. And when those trails have been recognized, we try to use those as corridors to get into communities. Some communities, quite frankly, don't want a road to them. They would just as soon be an outpost in the wilderness and fly in. And some of it is because the hunting in a small area, that community gets the best benefit of that hunting. And so we struggle in Alaska on how to build a road to our resources. If you have a good gold mine, how do you get to it? And the Pebble Mine obviously is a big one because you have the national fishery there that is a benefit to the state. It's the Bristol Bay fishery, which is both national and state. And then you have this wonderful copper mine that has gold and lead in it that is high quality copper that the world needs if they're gonna use windmills and electric cars. How to get that copper without disturbing that fishery is a huge debate. And some people nationally, internationally, and even in the state are not interested in any development in Alaska. Now, I don't follow that line. I'm okay with development. We just want to make sure we take care of everything. We don't want to mess up our fishery doing it. But you can get the copper out without disturbing the fishery. But some people think any disturbance in Alaska is unacceptable. And for those of us who live here, most of us think, let's build it. There's a lot of geography here. And if you look at the size of the state of Alaska and how many roads we do have, in Michigan, you have a lot of roads, a lot of bridges. We don't. But you have a lot more population. So it's a big debate. We have to continually, as a state, be a good steward while we appeal to the federal government, who gets to control a lot of that. And so that creates tension, there's no doubt, between the federal government and the state government and a local community being involved. And so as you see in Congress, they're going through revising the National Environmental Policy Act. That's a big deal to Alaska, because if they can revise that so that we can actually get something done, it would be helpful to Alaska. We still want our environment to be sound and healthy, but we can build a road and do that. So outside of the Tongass Forest, everything we do is greenfield. New road is going to be paved with litigation and permits.
Gotcha. Okay. Very nice. This one particular, this one kind of gets another point. I mean, we heard in detail. I mean, what's happening with the road system and the environment a little bit. So what I've been hearing in Alaska. I mean, not only in Alaska, it's happening all over the world, but in Alaska in particular. I mean, the small people are migrating from small towns. I mean, to the small villages to the towns for their livelihood. Or day to day. To earn more money or to have a better living lifestyle. So with these things, so how do you look at it? Do you suggest some of the villages to fade out and then build the towns? Or I know it's a little tough thing. To say politically. What I've been hearing is some people do wish that some places are not viable, just like a business. Let us say when you're in a business, some businesses, but at some stage it's not viable to operate it. We need to close down. So the same way, in the life also, when you're in the village, you don't have many opportunities, and you will not be able to grow beyond certain point, and it won't be with the less number of people in the village. It's not viable for the village to run. So with that's from business angle. So how do you look at this one? The emotions and the business and then the enrichment of the people, especially in Alaska, because I know most of the people are in the rural areas, but people are migrating to as you said rightly, to the towns. So what's your perspective on this?
There are several kind of dynamics to this. There's the economics, and I think you put your finger right on it. If you live in a village that has no cash income, it's just going to wither away. And anybody who wants to be productive, if they want to be an engineer or a teacher, they're going to have to go somewhere where they can do that trade. A lot of villages don't have that because either they don't have the business basis. So yes, you're right. A lot of villages are drying up because if somebody wants to work, they got to go to that work. In Alaska, though, there are some unique things. And what we've tried to do is say, okay, we'll give incentives if you work 2 weeks in a certain area and spend that money back home. There are ways that we can help. And so since the oil money comes from the rural areas, what we have decided is if the monies come from the rural areas, we will try to undergird the kind of the management of villages, tribal governments, and city governments to give them the ability to get fresh water, to do their sanitation, maybe even public safety. So we've taken the income from Alaska and tried to invest it in these communities so that they can figure out ways to create a cash economy. Some of it's going to be tourism. Some of it's going to be niche marketing. But we are in the middle of it. And yes, right now, if a young woman or a young man wants to become a doctor, they have to leave town. They have to go someplace where they can get that education. And then they have to go to a city where there's a hospital to train in. And that's Fairbanks, Anchorage, Juneau, for the most part. Now they can go back to the coastal towns and be a PA or a doctor or a dentist, and many do. But most end up in the towns where they can ply their trade economically. And that is, I'm kind of an example of that. I came out of a village of 300 people. In order for me to make a living, I had to leave. There's only so many jobs available in that town. And in order for me to grow, I needed to leave and to ply my trade. So I understand that very well. And I still love that town. I still have property in that town, and I still bring money back to that town, but I don't live there. And so many people do it just like that.
I hear your perspective on this particular thing. And I've been hearing from you about the giving money back to the people for the permanent funding. And I read one thing about recently on the permanent funding, permanent fund. Earlier, people, I mean, the Senate or House used to decide the dividend based on the interest or of the earnings of the fund, rather than getting into the cutting the savings or the fund itself. But off late, it looks like Senate are proposing to give more money. Take the money from the savings and then give it to the distribute it as a dividend to the citizens. So, do you think is it a good thing to start, or what do you think? How long do you think this fund will survive? And also at the same time, you also brought up one more topic in the beginning, like politics are surfacing, like socialistic and then the democratic kind of politics are surfacing. So this giving back money to the people, isn't it socialistic? You're able to give it. But that's good. Good. But at the same time, some people may be expecting and depending on this money. Having an extra cushion is different, and counting on it is different. That will be So what are your views on the permanent fund and the socialistic approaches, and how long this fund will survive?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the basics. When we had the oil start to flowing in Alaska in the 70s, we decided in the 80s that we were spending the money too fast. So what we chose to do was take 25% of that oil value and put it into a fund, and we called it the permanent fund. And the reason we called it the permanent fund is we put it in the Constitution, and you can't use anything that's deposited into the fund. You can only use what the fund earns. So if there's an argument at all, is over what does the fund earn. And the Constitution says that's up to the legislature. The legislature, way back in the 80s, decided we would create a formula. We would take 25% of the earnings over a 5-year period, and we would distribute that as a permanent fund dividend to all of Alaskans. We actually cut our income tax down because we had enough money flowing through the oil. The 75% kept our government going, and we shared that dividend, and then we just put whatever was left in the earnings, we put right back into the fund. So it grew rather rapidly over the years. The idea was we would share a little bit of the wealth with Alaska, and then we would use that for government when we needed it. Well, the formula was really designed around a $20 billion fund, not a $60 billion fund. And so the formula has become more and more generous. And you're exactly right. It came to be an expected money that was almost like a basic income. And even though it was, it could have been $3,000 a year based on the formula. But what happened was the oil price started going down, the volume started going down, and we had to say, we think we need some for our schools and our roads and our public safety and our land management. And we had to change that formula. That has been no small task because politically it's very hot. You're taking money out of people's expectation, right? So that's one of the reasons why I might not get elected this time, because I was one that said, well, let's change the formula. Still, let's share the wealth, but we got to build Alaska. And so that's kind of how I said, share the wealth, build Alaska. That was the moniker that I put on it, because I still think in the smaller communities, you don't just shut people off. What you do is you say, we can share what we can, but it has come to be maybe an urban legend that money belongs to them, not to the state. Well, it's a sovereign wealth fund. It was put together with oil money from the state. It was guaranteed a resource when the federal government and the state agreed upon statehood. So yes, it's a hot debate, because if you have money going out and people expect that money, and then all of a sudden you change it and you want to build a government, it's bloated government, right? Your schools are bloated, your university is bloated, and those things may be true, but that doesn't mean you give them the death blow. So the whole idea of the permanent fund was, we'll take a non-renewable resource, oil, and turn it into a renewable resource market for when oil doesn't supply our needs anymore. We can undergird our government. That was right in the constitutional language. But we decided to share it with a dividend because we didn't need it at that point. Now we need it, and now the debate is hot. And so and I may lose the election over it. I'm down 140 votes, and there's about 3,500 votes to count yet. So we'll see. But I mean, it has been that hot of a debate.
Yeah, it may take a few days, as you said earlier. I mean, it may take a few days to know the results. Let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
And yeah, just I said rightly. I mean, once see the psychology of the people is, I mean, once you get used to one benefit, I mean, if you take away that benefit, I mean, some very less percentage of people will be willing to take the hit, or I mean, or maybe they are at a state. I mean, it does not matter for them, and $1,200 or $3,000 may not matter to them. So those people may willingly accept that one. But I mean, people, I mean, with the paycheck to paycheck, maybe would be challenging.
This year, we gave $1,000 to every man, woman, and child in Alaska. $1,000. So, and if you have a family of 5 people, that gets to be pretty big. But the expectation was a $3,000 dividend. Well, you can see the difference in that. If you had 5 people in a family and you only got 5,000 when you could have got 3 times that amount. So
I mean, that's a big money. I mean, you can pay off something. I mean, while you take care of 1 or 2 items in the family. I mean, a rent or food for the whole year, those kind of things.
Yeah, and so that's the difference between in our budget, on the state budget, about $750 million or $3 billion. That's the difference. And our income went from $6 billion to $3 billion in oil just the last couple of years. And we've had to use some of our earnings from the permanent fund to undergird that drop. Even though we've cut government several $billion, we still are going to have to depend upon that non-renewable resource is going away. The renewable resource is going to help us. It's a tough discussion. And it is true. Sometimes government is just sometimes unresponsive and overbloated. I get that. And yes, we have to have some changes, but that doesn't mean you destroy it either. So it's quite a discussion up here, I can tell you. And I've just gone through the last 3 weeks of getting my ear pounded from both sides.
I can understand. I can understand what would have been, I mean, on this particular topic. So today I would like to move on to the last topic. And you being a teacher, I mean, for more than 10 years, and then, I mean, you see the benefits of education. I mean, yourself, and you know that, I mean, education is the one which will enrich the people to move out of the other developing countries will call it as a move out of the poverty, but in Alaska, enrich yourself and move to the next stage of the life. So how is the education system in Alaska? And overall, we are complaining about the education system in the US itself. I mean, and Alaska also, I mean, has some challenges, what I've seen. So what is your perspective on the education system in Alaska and the US in overall?
Sure. Well, we in Alaska, we have about 135,000 students. And it's a fairly decent education system. It's certainly like many other places. In some ways, you have to be careful of the indoctrination that happens in education and try to preserve the education part. And in our laws and in our society, school has become more and more expected to manage people's lives rather than give them opportunities to learn. So I taught in a private school. I was a Christian school. Certainly in a Christian school, you would think they would indoctrinate. But in a public school, there's a lot of isms in our schools. Everything from environmentalism to just name the ism, right? And so I struggle with those things and I push back against those things. But I still believe that the state can help provide a fundamental education for every child in Alaska. And there's 135,000 students in Alaska. We should be able to do it, and we should be able to do it well. We have a university that is a little bloated, and it's got 3 campuses for a very small population. But our geography kind of requires that we have these campuses. So we're poor in our reading skills, and we're failing. We're failing our students in many ways. So we've got to switch it up. I've been on the education committee in Alaska now for a number of times, and we've got to get our students reading by first grade, third grade. And for some reason, we just haven't been able to get there. And so I've worked with the education community to get youngsters reading. Some of it is we have so many different languages in Alaska. Like I said earlier, we're a very diverse population. We have some villages in Alaska, they don't even speak English. They just speak Indian or Eskimo or Yupik. And so, English is a second language to many of them. So we have to keep plugging away at it. But the vast majority of our failures are in our urban areas, and that can change. It's just not acceptable. So some of it is what society dishes up. A lot of kids come to school unprepared, whether they come as a 5-year-old and they don't understand socialization, or they can't read, or they don't know numbers. Families just don't help them. We depend upon the schools to do that. So there's been a debate up here, like in all over America, should we do pre-K teaching? And my response quite often is, if you haven't helped them from first grade through 12th grade, what makes you think you're going to help them if you go pre-K? So I need some proof that they can if we put extra money in, that they can put it to work and actually help students, rather than feed a system that is more interested in its system than its teaching. So in Alaska, we got a lot of work to do. We fall way behind on reading and math skills. We just do. And so that's unacceptable to me. And I'm willing to keep plugging away at trying to get our teachers the tools they need. Some of the teachers probably need to go. But we have a hard time attracting teachers in Alaska, to be quite frank with you. So the more you get out of the urban areas, the less likely it is to get a teacher to stay for a long time. So there are some real struggles in Alaska, but we also have some wonderful teachers. I've seen private school. We've got cyber schools up here. We've got charter schools, and some of our box schools have just done wonderful things. So you can't paint everybody with a broad brush. It's just that when we look at our national scores, they don't look good. We got to do better.
I got you. You did, mention one point. When they come to the school, some kids they don't come prepared. On that particular comment, I would say, I was also reading about the education system in India and other places. Especially Finland is number one, and Korea, Japan, these countries are working on. They are doing relatively better. What we have observed, wherever I go and read, the first point they are saying is parents' involvement is very important.
Exactly.
And what I've been seeing is, in Alaska, in some of the articles when I said, correct me if I'm wrong, the parenting, there is no good parenting in Alaska. So what do you say about, I mean, one thing, one side, the education system needs or demands parents' involvement in their child's education. And the other side, we read comments on the news items that there is a bad parenting. I mean, I'm not saying bad parenting. There is no good parenting in Alaska. So, so how is there any truth in the statement, or what's your views and perspective on this?
Yeah, and with the parenting issue, we have kind of incentivized single parenting in Alaska, just like we have it all over America. And when you incentivize single parenting, it's economically the choice is to do single parenting. So, and that's part of a worldwide issue. That when you get into Alaska, we're split almost 50-50 between good parenting and needy parenting. So, and yes, when it shows up at school, it really shows up. So, and what that does, though, in education, it puts the achievers of good families way ahead, and it kind of puts a tension in our schools. And schools naturally want to slow down to the slowest. And so many parents are just saying, I'll put my kids in a charter school. I'll put my kids in a special school or a private school. And so that tension has been not healthy for Alaska in many ways. I think that shows up in our scores. So I wish I had a good answer for that. If some of it is a societal problem, I don't know the government can solve that one. We have incentivized, I think, the wrong things. And maybe there's ways we could talk about that in the legislature. Some people think that if the government just becomes a better manager of the younger kids, that will prosper. I just don't, I'm not a big fan of the government being the nanny. I'm just not. And so that's what some people think that has to happen. And they think that'll solve the problem. I think it'll make it worse. I think parent, and as a Christian man, probably what I would do is run off. If I don't get elected, I'm going to go try to help families get their feet back under them. And I think that's something that we as a society have to do.
Gotcha. We got your views on this one. I mean, I know I said this is the last topic, but I mean, with being in Alaska, I will not be able to end without asking this particular question. So, how is this Arctic status of Alaska and also the environmental issues, the impact in the Alaska? And any message, you can club this one with any message to the audience, and we can call it last topic. Sorry.
Well, first of all, we have a very pristine and beautiful environment up here. And we have been very pleased with how well we've managed it. And coming through the 20th century, we got better and better and better at it. Some of it was forced upon us and some of it we embraced. However, there are environmentalists that don't want anything being built in Alaska. And they see this as a grand park for their benefit. And those of us who live here feel the pressure of it. We want to grow and produce. And so when it's my turn to talk to the environmentalists, now I'm a good steward, but they're an ist, they're an environmentalist. I use 3 words: produce, reduce, and conserve. If you're not producing as a people, you're going to be indentured or die. And we have to produce off our land. And that's whether it's mining, oil, gas, agriculture, just name the issue. And we can do it with computer technology and all that. I get that. But you got to produce something of value. Then you can reduce your risk, your environmental risk, your economic risk. And then you conserve. You just conserve so that the next generation gets a beautiful state when you're done with it, when you're done with your time in it. And so, but if you're not producing, you can't do the other two. And many environmentalists don't care. Because they can produce somewhere else, and we're a small enough population that they can go to Congress and they can get 700,000 people to sign a petition. Well, I only have 700,000 people in Alaska. So they can overrule us many, many ways. And so we do have to fight the Goliaths of the world from time to time. And it sounds like we are against our federal government. We're not. We just want to preserve our ability to produce in Alaska. And we have good minerals, we have good rocks, we have good oil, gas, we've got good natural resources, we've got wonderful fish and wildlife, but they need managed. If you just leave the fish and game, for example, to the wild, then the predators will eat up all the good food. You manage your predators so you can have good food for the people who live here, and that takes management. If you just left it unmanaged, then it goes to waste. And that's true whether it's our forest or our fish or our game. And those of us in Alaska, we feel like we're the stewards for this land, and that we are the host to the whole world to make the people feel comfortable and safe when they come here. The federal government and many environmentalists and the World Wildlife Federation and all that, they don't feel that way about Alaska. They feel that it's their special toy, and we're not a toy. We're just a people trying to make a good living.
Gotcha. We heard, so thanks for your views and perspective. So do you want to say any message to the, audience? And do you want to say if they want to reach out to you, where they can reach out to you? Can you give your website address and those things, please?
Sure. If you want to reach out to me, John Coghill, you can Google the name John Coghill Jr., State Senate, Alaska. And there's a state Senate, or I'm on campaigning right now, so you can Coghill 2020 is my website, but it's a sparse website. Welcome to Alaska. Come visit us. We're still growing. We're trying to make it beautiful, and we love visitors.
Thank you very much, Senator, for coming on to the show and sharing your views and perspectives and also the information about the Alaska. And have a nice rest of the day, and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Have a pleasant day.
You too. Thank you.